Good morning. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Sarah Reiling, one of the worship associates, and part of the team that brings the services to you today. We're glad you're with us today. Whether you're a member or a new visitor, we welcome you. Whether you're here in the sanctuary or watching online, may you find connection with us and nourishment for your mind and spirit. Here at Community UU, we welcome all of who you are and all of who you dream of becoming. If you would like to share something that is in your heart today, there's a book in the back between the two cabinets where you may write your joy, sorrow, or concern. Later in the service, we will read from the book. In this way, your joys and concerns will become part of this service and part of the prayers and thoughts of this congregation. We welcome to our pulpit today Sarah Berel-Harrop. Sarah Berel-Harrop is the Faith and Democracy organizer at the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry and a seminarian at Meadville Lombard Theological School. She grew up a UU and raised two children as UUs in Houston, Texas. Sarah has been engaged in the congregational life in Houston and the Dallas-Fort Worth area in many capacities: religious educator, social justice chair, and board leadership. She is passionate about nurturing groups and communities grounded in relationship and trust that offer alternatives to organizations based on domination and control. Please give Sarah a warm welcome. So I hope we don't confuse you today by having two Sarahs.
Worship is a time that we come together for community reflection and transformation. And so settle in with these words invoking the past, present, and future by Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and their wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us and online. Come into this space, mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship.
We light our chalice today in solidarity with all the other UU congregations that are also lighting their chalice. Our chalice lighter today is Cris Toney.
This flame, a symbol of the fire in our hearts, the fire we inherited from those who loved us and stretched us into this moment, from those who sparked a passion for justice and compassion that calls us into action. The fire that connects us as we gather from our separate spaces, the fire that sustains us as we build community today and capacity for tomorrow's work, that we, in our turn, may bequeath the fire to those who follow us, in building the world we dream about, in bending Texas and the world towards justice.
Thank you, Cris. And thank you, Sarah. She wrote that. This church, like all Unitarian Universalist congregations and churches, is not bound by a common creed. We are not required to make an affirmation of belief. Instead, we are bound together by our covenant, the promises we have made to each other and the wider community. We recommit ourselves to these promises every time we recite our covenant. Please join me as once again we say these words together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Angel Dillion will read our message for all ages today.
Our message for all ages today is Higgins, A Drop with a Dream by Christopher Buice. Once upon a time, there was a drop of water named Higgins. Higgins was no ordinary drop of water. He was a drop with a dream. Higgins lived in a valley where it had not rained in a very long time, so all the lovely green grass was turning brown, all the beautiful flowers were wilting, and all the trees were starting to droop. Higgins had a dream that one day the valley would be a beautiful place again. But what could he do? After all, he was only one drop of water. One day, Higgins decided to travel and tell others about his dream. All the other drops listened very politely, but no one believed that his dream would come true. "Higgins," said one, "get your head out of the clouds. You can't spend your whole life dreaming." Higgins decided that he had to do something to make his dream come true. So he began to think and think and think. One day, as he was walking by a rusty old bucket, he got an idea. If enough of us drops of water got together in this bucket, Higgins thought, there would be enough water to sprinkle on a few flowers to help them grow and become beautiful again. Eagerly, Higgins told everyone his great idea, but everyone thought he was being foolish. "That Higgins is nothing but a dreamer," they said. Higgins decided he had to do something to convince the others that he was right. So he said to them, "I don't know about you, but I'm getting into that bucket. I hope some of you will join me. Then there might be enough water to help us at least some flowers grow beautiful again." So Higgins ran as hard as he could, hopped way up in the air, and landed with a kerplunk in the bottom of the bucket. And there he sat, just a drop in the bucket. For a long time, Higgins was very lonely. It seemed like no one else was going to join him. But after a while, some of the other drops could see that the grass was dying and the flowers were wilting and the trees were drooping. They all agreed that something must be done. Suddenly, one drop shouted, "I'm going in the bucket with Higgins," and he leaped through the air and landed kerplunk in the bucket. Then two other drops yelled, "Wait for us!" and they hopped through the air and landed in the bucket. Then 10 drops jumped through the air in the bucket, then 30, then 50, and then hundreds of drops came from all around just to hop in the bucket. Soon the bucket was completely full of water, but there were still more drops that wanted to join, so they found another bucket and hopped in. Before long, there were 2 buckets of water, then 3, then 4, then 10, then hundreds, and then thousands of buckets of water. Along came a powerful breeze that blew over all the buckets, and all the water flowed together to make a mighty stream. Everywhere the water flowed, the grass turned green again, and the flowers bloomed, and the trees stood tall and straight once more. All this happened because Higgins had a dream, and his dream came true. Because he knew that although he was just a drop in the bucket, enough drops in the bucket make a bucket full, and when there are enough buckets with the wind behind them, then justice will roll down like waters in righteousness, like a mighty stream.
So I have a composite reading today from both the Unitarian Universalist Association and the King Center. So as y'all most likely know, the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly passed new bylaws language in the place of the old 7 principles back in June. It consists of values of what we believe, and then the covenants, which is what that value calls us to do. And so I would like to read for you the part of the bylaws that speaks to justice. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. And from the King Center, to ground us in beloved community is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of connection. And that sort of leads me into what I wanted to chat with y'all today about, which is faith in democracy. Now, the story today, many of you might have recognized, comes from the has as a seed the Hebrew scriptures, the prophet Amos, who said that justice shall roll down like waters. Now, a prophet has sort of a double vision, right? The prophet sees things as they are, and the prophet also sees things as they can be, and then speaks the truth about both those things. So when I talk about faith in democracy, I don't mean like an unquestioning faith. I'm speaking of a notion of a prophetic, disruptive faith in democracy. Because as you surely know, in the United States, from the very beginning, democracy was a veneer. It was not an actual thing. White male landowners made decisions for everyone else. And we called this representative democracy. And those who were not part of the vision of who could drive the bus, who could be included in making these critical decisions, pushed back. And they said, you know, your moral imagination is too small. We, too, are entitled to the same human rights and self-determination that you have taken for yourself. We want to speak for ourselves. And you see the traces of this struggle between the veneer and the folks who are like, well, no, wait a minute. Like, let's be a little critical of what's going on. You see these traces in the U.S. Constitution. And it's 100 years long struggle. You see at the beginning the Reconstruction amendments in the late 1860s, 1868 and 1870, that said, well, if somebody's older than 21 and they're male, they can vote. All right. Still, we have some people missing. So it took quite several years until 1920 before women got in the game with the 19th Amendment. And it took still another 40 years for people to say, okay, wait, this is not working the way that we thought it would, and we need to abolish poll taxes. That was 1964. And then finally, in 1971, 100 years after the Reconstruction Amendment, which many of you all may have even been involved in this struggle, the franchise was extended to those who were over 18. But as we know, like, there is still issues with people having to pay, essentially, to vote, with IDs, with disenfranchisement laws. And so you've got this back and forth, this struggle that's been going on for years and years and years for this thing, democracy, this idea that democracy is a way that we can organize ourselves so that we can all thrive. And why do we believe so strongly in it? And what is it that we actually believe in? I don't know if y'all remember back as far as 2005. There was this strategy, I guess you would say, by the religious right to put marriage on the ballots. And this occurred in Texas. And at the time, nobody in Texas was going to have marriage equality. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. But nevertheless, we had to have it in a constitutional vote, essentially a vote shaming and calling out for disregard the gay and lesbian communities. It was a nationwide campaign that put homophobia on the ballot. And this very harmful ballot measure passed overwhelmingly. Now, it was a really small percentage of voters that participated in this election. It was like 18%. This was 13% of the voting age population that even voted in this election. And so we had this tiny minority of people that used the veneer of democracy, like let's put this up to a vote for everyone, to target a vulnerable population for harm. So that's a data point, right? Like, democracy doesn't work. It's just being used to hurt people. But there's a little bit of other news about this. There were 2 legislators in the Texas legislature who could have stopped this. One in the Senate, one in the House. They lost their elections the following year, both of them. And so we see in this that accountability is also a possibility. If people get involved and get together. So we have faith in democracy, knowing that democratic processes can be used to harm. So this is the double vision, right? We know that there are ways that the processes don't work, but we believe it must not always be so. We believe in a way that inspires action, faithful action. And that's the faith part. We know what we want to be, a beloved community where all can thrive. We know the future that we want, and we can get together to build it. Now, voting someone out of office is well and good, and that's a 20-year-old story. And we're sitting here today where we have attacks on the very idea that you would have peaceful transfer of power after an election. These are election denial, which we see is still happening, and then the coup attempt in January 6th, 2001. So what we see is like this dance that I was mentioning to you before. This is not the first time. It's probably not going to be the last time. In Reconstruction, there was a overt racist backlash to the choices of expanding the electorate. And it stopped progress for a while. In the 40s, it happened again. Check out Rachel Maddow's Ultra podcast. It's fascinating. And now we're seeing it once more. It's exhausting, right? That we have to always be on the lookout for people that are trying to hold power for themselves instead of building power with community. It's exhausting. But it's also exhilarating that we can be part of the struggle to change that. My faith in democracy includes a belief that Unitarian Universalists, with our interfaith and our secular partners, can in fact do that work and create multiracial, pluralistic, inclusive democracy. And I'm really excited about that prospect. And I invite you to think about, like, who am I in that process? Because not everybody has the same passions. Not everybody has the same skills. Not everybody has the same time to spend. But as we talk today, and I'll stay here for the church chat, I invite you into a wonder, a sense of, like, what's the piece that I can do about democracy? So now I want to lift up something from the UUA bylaws that you heard in the first reading. We value democratic processes. There's more than one type. And not all processes work as well as, so always giving thought in your own communities and what you're advocating for, of, like, is this an inclusive democratic process that we're doing? And that's the second part, is we aspire to inclusive processes. We actively seek ways to get more people and more diverse people involved in the process. 13% of the voting age population isn't representative of what the community needs. 20% isn't representative. 50% isn't representative. And the people who really most are impacted by what's going on in our culture frequently are the people who are least likely to have their voices heard. And so that's this concept of sort of expanding both the faith and the participation and the actual democracy, like jumping in the bucket for democracy. And another point about the Article 2 value is, what's the reason why, as Unitarian Universalists, we support democratic processes? Is it so that we can, like, just go and put our choices in the ballot box and walk away, everything is good? No. We don't have faith in democracy as an end in itself. It is so that we can create multicultural, beloved community. So it's part of a whole standpoint and posture in life that you matter, each individual matters, and we can get together, we can make good decisions for all of us. Which is that concept of beloved community, that we can work for the common good. And a very important underlying concept about beloved community is that nonviolence is the fundamental principle. So faith in democracy implies we believe that we can engage, we can agitate, we can build power with, and have peaceful transfers of the power of government rather than authoritarian coercion. And that we can do this in our church, in our neighborhood, in our city, in the legislature, in the federal government. So we've got a microcosm here, and we're just pushing out this way of being, of bringing the people who are most impacted by injustice into the center of our decision making, not making decisions for the people who are impacted, but being led by the people who are impacted. And that could be our organizing principle. And so when I do democracy work, I think about what does it look like when we center justice? Justice-centered democracy work moves in relationship and partnership with the people who are most directly impacted. And so as a congregation or individually, you might ask yourself, Am I connected to a local environmental justice group? Am I connected with a reproductive justice advocacy group? Who are the people I already know who are doing good stuff that I can get engaged with? We want to remove impediments to voting. We know there's all kinds of ways that people are discouraged, are actually barred from voting. And so we could provide information about polling sites, about rides, and it's not a either or, it's a both and. A healthy wonder about the reasons why people might be disillusioned with voting as an expression of their power. What is going on that is an actual impediment to their thriving? What do they want? What do we want for ourselves and for our communities? And what are the ways that we can enact that power in addition to voting? And so organizing with the issues forward, not like go vote for this thing, go vote for that thing. No, more like I'm a reproductive justice advocate. I'm involved by supporting the AFIA Center, by going out and talking to people about the importance of being able to have access to abortion. So all those sort of community things. Oh, and by the way, I go vote as a reproductive justice voter as well. And so this idea that we can generate hope and excitement with the work that we're doing, and then, by the way, let's go vote. And that brings into the question advocacy for policy initiatives that would make a difference. So that's continual work. It's not just every 2 years, every 4 years. I'm here to tell you as an election judge, you can vote every year if you want to. There's at least that many elections. But the advocacy work is continual work, and that is work that the Texas Justice Ministry engages in. So it involves visiting elected officials and policymakers between elections. And this is, again, where being engaged with your community is really, really important, because there are people in the community that have really important concerns, really important needs, and they don't have the time to get on the bus and go to Austin. They're trying to feed their kids. And so when you are engaged in this dynamic relationship with community members, you're a better advocate for the things that our communities need to thrive. So one other point about justice-centered democracy work, it acknowledges there are limits to the efficacy of the current democratic process that we have right now. We're not going to overcome gerrymandering by voting harder. That's accurate. We're not going to remove the influence of lobbyists and money from elections by voting harder. And even some really good legislators compromise on really important principles. So again, seeing democracy as a tool and not an end is what I would like to suggest, is that justice-centered democracy starts with your community, however that's defined. Most people have multiple communities that they're engaged in, and the way that your community is going to be together and surface the concerns and surface the ideas about what we can do. Those prophetic ideas that we see. There's no flowers here. We see that there's not a way that the sun, I'm trying to come back to this story, right? That the sun is beating down and it's normally a good, but it's not a good right now because it's not tempered with the water and the soil that we can have blooming gardens. And we also see the blooming gardens. And so we know if we can kind of get together and jump in that bucket, we can make the blooming gardens. And so I think it's about grounding the work in hope and in possibility. I once worked on a campaign, and there were 16 votes that decided this election. And in my imagination, I personally helped swing the outcome, but I gotta say, probably the Vietnamese lady who was calling Vietnamese people in Vietnamese for 2 weeks probably swayed more voters than I did, because she probably talked to more people. But I could see, like, I had talked to 100 people. So any of them could have been one of those 16 people. So, like, the excitement of being able to make a difference, like surfacing, where is that place where you can make a difference like that? Local officials have this profound impact on quality of life, and they're usually more accessible. And so my personal joy is around getting people engaged with local elections. Your source of joy and possibility may be different, but my invitation to you is to take some time to reflect on what that source of hope and joy is and share it. Howard Thurman talked about how the world needed apostles of sensitivity. That's the language that he used, that to change the world, what we needed was people who were connected and wanted to go out there and get people connected with each other and base the world and their lives in love. I'm here to tell you, we need ambassadors of hope. We need to be out there as Unitarian Universalists, as whoever you show up as, in your neighborhood, in your community, at your work, as somebody who believes this country has promise. This country can be multicultural, pluralistic, beloved communities. And these are the ways that I show up for that. So, why do we have faith in democracy? And what would that look like? What does a prophetic faith in democracy look like? We might include, and certainly there's a lot of emphasis on get out the vote work right now, but the faith in democracy that's prophetic also works to develop or deepen partnership with impacted communities, actively creating conditions where all can thrive. Seeing democracy work as consistent civic engagement, demanding the culture where all can thrive. Building community power grounded in joy, in hope, and in possibility. That we take these bones that we have, this veneer of democracy, and look at them, like, okay, they're bones, but here's what we can do with them. And actually build multiracial, pluralistic, inclusive democracy. And by the way, like, when we do that, we're probably going to avert white Christian nationalism and fascism. But, like, my concern is building that great, loving, compassionate, passionate community. So kind of to kind of come out a little bit into what Unitarian Universalism as a whole is doing, last election cycle, Unitarian Universalists contacted 3 million voters as part of our electoral work. And this election cycle, we also want to contact 3 million voters. And our hope is that we have conversations with voters about issues that matter to them. And I'm just so excited to invite you to get involved with this joyful and faithful work. And as Jean-Luc Picard would say, make it so.
Our worship time is drawing to a close, and as our custom, we will extinguish our chalice. Please say these words together with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And our benediction words are reading number 698, actually, in the Gray Hymnal. Words from Reverend Wayne B. Arnason. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.